The palace was heavy with silence the morning after Malik's return. Shadows still lingered in the corners of the halls, though dawn's pale light crept across the marble floors. The great chambers, once filled with laughter and wedding songs, now carried the weight of whispers and dread. Jafari lay awake on the vast bed he shared with Sankitara. His eyes traced the carved ceiling above, but he saw nothing. His mind was too full. The sheets beside him were cold, untouched. The Dark King had not returned. He had spent the night where Jafari longed for him not to be, at Malik's bedside. Jafari's heart ached in ways he had no words for. He pressed his hand to his chest as if he could steady its breaking rhythm. Only yesterday, this same chamber had been alive with dreams of a wedding, a future, a love sealed before gods and men. Now the silence itself seemed to mock him. Across the palace, Sankitara sat rigid by Malik's side. All night he had watched the fragile rise and fall of the man's chest, every shallow breath pulling him further into the storm of grief, joy, and disbelief. His hand had hovered above Malik's, trembling, afraid to touch, afraid the body would vanish like smoke if he dared. When the first light of dawn pierced the shutters, Sankitara rose and left the chamber. His steps were heavy but unyielding as he crossed into the great hall where nobles and guests, summoned hastily, gathered in uneasy clusters. All eyes turned to him, searching his face for answers, for hope, for direction. But his gaze was cold, unreadable, his voice a low thunder. "The wedding," he declared, each word deliberate, echoing through the chamber, "is postponed indefinitely." Gasps rippled like wind through dry grass. No explanation followed, no comfort, no reasoning, only a declaration, final as stone. Some nobles lowered their heads in silence, others dared to whisper behind their hands. But none questioned the Dark King aloud. His word was law, even when it broke hearts. At the back of the hall, Jafari stood apart, his face pale, his spirit trembling. He did not weep, he did not speak, but inside he felt the ground shift beneath him, as though the world he had built with Sankitara, the love, the trust, the promises, was crumbling into dust. Later that afternoon, the nobles who had come to witness a wedding of the century now packed their carriages in silence, their silks and jewels dulled by unease. The courtyard, once alive with music, now rang only with the creak of wheels and the stamping of restless horses. From the shadows of a colonnade, Jafari stood watching. His eyes followed each departing banner as it was folded away, each farewell bow exchanged without joy. The air was thick with the sound of departure, the thud of chests being loaded, the rustle of servants hastening their masters into the cool morning light. He felt as though he were watching his own happiness being packed away with them, carried off on the backs of horses and wagons. Only yesterday, those same nobles had raised goblets in his honor, praising his love, toasting his future. Today, they left with whispers on their tongues, eyes averted, carrying with them the broken promise of a wedding that had never come. Baraka approached quietly, his footsteps soft against the stone. He did not speak at once, only stood beside his brother, following his gaze over the slow unraveling of celebration. Finally, his voice came low, heavy with concern. "How do you fare?" Jafari's lips parted, but no easy answer came. His throat was tight, his heart raw. At last, he spoke, his words breaking like brittle reeds. "I do not know." His eyes fixed on the departing carriages. "Only days ago, I lived the happiest week of my life, all gathered to celebrate my love with Sankitara, and my heart was full." He drew a shaking breath, his voice trembling as though each word cut deeper. "And now I do not even know what my life is. I do not even know what this postponement means. Are we still to be wed, or am I already forgotten? For a long moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the cry of crows circling above the scorched palace walls. Baraka turned to Jafari, his expression grave but tender. He placed a hand upon his younger brother's shoulder, his grip firm, steadying. Yet he said nothing, for there were no words in all the kingdom that could heal the confusion, no comfort that would not sound hollow. Sometimes silence was the only truth. Jafari lowered his head, leaning slightly into the touch, though his heart still felt unbearably alone. The days unfolded like a long morning. After the noble's departure, the palace felt hollow, its great halls emptied of laughter and music. What had once been a place of celebration now carried only the sound of footsteps in corridors and the low murmur of servants who dared not speak too loudly of what they had witnessed. And through it all, Jafari walked as a ghost within his own life. Again and again, he reached out to Sankitara, soft words, gentle touches, quiet pleas, but each time his hand was brushed aside, each attempt left unanswered. His place in the king's life seemed to shrink with each passing hour until he wondered if he was even seen at all. The chambers they once shared remained untouched, their bed cold, the silence around it deafening. Sankitara had forgotten the way to those rooms. He lived instead by Malik's bedside. The Dark King, who had commanded armies and broken kingdoms, now bent himself to the most fragile of tasks. He refused to let even the most skilled attendants draw near. It was his own hands that cooled Malik's fever, his own arms that lifted a frail body to sip broth, his own cloth that wiped the sweat from a brow twisted by restless dreams. Malik slept through the days like one caught between worlds. Hours would pass in stillness, only to be broken by sudden terror. Eyes flying open, lips trembling with incoherent whispers, a cry torn from the chest, and then the heavy collapse back into sleep. Each time, Sankitara was there, whispering reassurances that the other man could not hear. The bruises marked Malik's skin like a map of suffering. Sankitara traced them one by one with trembling fingers, his chest burning with grief and rage. Dark stains across arms, ribs mottled with shadow, scars that spoke of old pain. Each mark was a story untold, a torment endured. "Who did this to you?" he whispered in the stillness, his voice raw. His hand lingered over Malik's chest, where his heart still beat faintly, stubbornly. "Who touched you with such cruelty? Tell me his name, and I will kill him. I will tear him apart with my own hands." But Malik's lips only moved with fragments of broken dreams, words that made no sense. He spoke to shadows, not to the man bent over him. And so Sankitara waited. He waited for a story, for an answer, for Malik's eyes to open and truly see him. Outside that chamber, Jafari's world grew smaller and lonelier. He wandered the corridors, seeing his beloved at a distance only as a shadow crossing from one room to another, always with a bowl of broth, always with a damp cloth, always bound for Malik. And though Jafari's lips parted again and again with words of love, of need, of fear, they fell unheard. His heart ached not only with loss, but with a question that gnawed at him in silence. Had he already been replaced? Beyond the palace corridors where Jafari wandered like a ghost, the world found its voice. In the markets where spice sellers called over heaps of saffron and millet, tongues clattered faster than their brass scales. "The Dark King's lost lover has returned," they said, eyes shining. "The gods have remembered him at last and restored balance to his broken soul." By the river, fishermen pulled in thin nets and shook their heads at the sky. "No," others murmured. This is punishment. Did we not see the fires with our own eyes? Did we not bury our dead in the blackened earth? The gods are mirrors, they return what you give. Along the caravan road, traders paused beneath dust-heavy acacia trees. They spoke of distant courts and quiet enemies. It is a trick, they decided. A rival seeks to unmake him by planting a phantom in his house. Some hand far away set this piece upon the board. In courtyards, women pounding grain fell into hush between blows. A few glanced toward the palace with soft pity. Perhaps the king never healed, they whispered. Perhaps love that begins in ash can only ever return to ash. On the training grounds, young soldiers wrapped leather about their wrists and argued in low tones. Jafari was but a passing shadow, some muttered. It was always meant to be Malik. Say that again with the prince within earshot, others warned, and see what becomes of your teeth. In a forest village where many had hidden in the dark years, elders gathered around a cooking fire. Sparks rose like restless spirits. What you call resurrection, I call a rope thrown into deep water, said one. You do not ask who threw it, you grab hold or you drown. At the small temple on the hill, candles guttered before carved stone. The priest set out bowls of water and read the surface for signs. 2 names, he breathed to the novice by his side. 2 vows crossing like river currents, one will carry, one will drag. He would not say which. In the school for princes and princesses, a drum lesson stilled as the mentor listened to a panting courier. The old man's face revealed nothing. He only nodded, then dismissed the class early, letting the hall grow quiet enough to hear his own breath. He walked the colonnade with his hands clasped behind him, the way he did when a storm brewed far off, but he offered no judgment, no word to tip the balance of rumor. And still the stories multiplied. Some swore the crows circled in a gentler pattern at dawn. Others claimed a clay pot refused to boil in one household, the sign, they said, of a heart cooling. A goat miscarried in the outfields, a child slept at noon and woke crying the name of a stranger. It was enough in any land to feed 100 different truths. Within the palace itself, servants carried their steps like secrets. Baskets were lifted, curtains drawn, doors latched softly against the wind. The murmur from outside slipped in through shutters and under thresholds, a tide that could not be kept back by guard or decree. No one knew the truth. That was the one thread all hands could hold. But they agreed upon this much and said it in the same hush with which they spoke of thunderheads building over the plain. The Dark King's fate had turned. The murmur of the city had seeped into the palace like mist. Market talk, temple talk, the low tide of opinion that could not be barred by gates. Within, Jafari stood at the turn of a corridor, listening to the hush, gathering what courage he had left. The air held the faint scent of herbs and boiled bone. A moment later, Sankitara appeared, walking toward him with careful steps, both hands cupped around a steaming bowl. The king himself had cooked it, Malik's favorite, though Sankitara was no man of kitchens. He bore it like an offering carried to an altar. Sankitara, Jafari said, stepping into his path. We need to talk. Not now, the Dark King murmured, angling to pass. The surface of the broth trembled, a thin shimmer of heat quivering at the lip. If not now, then when? Jafari's voice broke sharper than he intended. He steadied it. I am your... We were to be married. I deserve to know what you are thinking. This is not only your pain. I have given you space. I have been patient and understanding because I know what this means to you. But I need to know what we are now. I deserve that much. Sankitara stopped. The steam climbed in quiet spirals between them. Neither spoke. At last he said, almost to the floor, I do not know. They moved to a small alcove where a lattice window spilled pale light across the stone. Sankitara set the bowl upon a low ledge. The fragrance of the broth rose around them, simple, earnest, the work of uncertain hands. "I did not expect this," he confessed, words slow, as though each cost him breath. "I do not know what to do. Malik was once my life. How can I abandon him now?" Jafari listened, jaw tight, one hand pressed against the window's carved frame as if it might keep him from swaying. He chose his next words with care. "Has he spoken? Has he said who took him, where he was all these years?" "Not yet," the king replied. Silence gathered again. Outside, a dove cooed in the courtyard, patient as time. Jafari felt the weight settle, heavy, certain, as if a great stone had been set upon his chest. He wanted to argue, to plead, to remind Sankitara of vows not yet made but already sworn between their hearts. Instead, he stood very still, the light cutting his profile, and let the moment pass over him like a cold wind. The steam from the bowl thinned and vanished, leaving only the faint sheen upon its surface, cooling like certainty itself. When Jafari left the alcove, the steam had already thinned from the bowl, and with it the surety he once carried. He walked the corridor as if wading through deep water, each step quiet, careful, heavy. In the small court beyond, under the patient shade of a fig tree, Mosi played with a wooden lion a carver from the market had made for him. He saw his father at once and ran to him, curls leaping, sandals slapping stone. Little hands caught Jafari's sleeve and tugged. "Papa," he whispered, as if secrets were safer in soft voices, "don't be sad." Jafari knelt so they were the same height. Mosi's eyes were dark and bright, like night just before the first star. The boy lifted the lion high. "Look," he said, puffing his chest, "I am brave. I will guard you." He set the lion on Jafari's shoulder with great ceremony, as if placing a crown. "Now you are safe." A smile found Jafari's mouth, small and trembling, but real. "With such a guard," he said, "even the wind will think twice." Mosi giggled and, in his seriousness, began a procession around his father, stomping like a warrior and humming a battle song he had invented. He tried a joke he had heard from a kitchen boy, and when he reached the end of it, he laughed so hard he hiccuped, holding his small belly. He pressed the lion into Jafari's palm, then climbed into his lap and tried to tug the corners of his father's mouth upward with two careful fingers, as if joy was something you could arrange with hands. "Please," Mosi said, close enough that Jafari felt the warmth of his breath. "Smile, Papa." "I am trying," Jafari answered. He stroked the boy's hair, slow and steady, letting the rhythm quiet his own heart. The scent of dust and fig leaves, of child and son, rose like a blessing. "Will we dance again?" Mosi asked after a while. "Like the night when we practiced for the wedding. I remember the step." He scrambled up and showed it, one foot forward, a hop, a clumsy turn, then stopped, looking quickly at his father's face as if afraid the word itself might wound. Jafari's gaze wavered, then softened. "Another time, little warrior," he said gently. "We will keep the dance for a day that needs it." Mosi nodded in solemn agreement and leaned his head against Jafari's shoulder. Together they listened to the quiet court, a bird scratching among fallen leaves, the distant clink of pots, a servant's footfall passing by. Jafari held his son as if the world might be persuaded by that single act to be kinder. Since Mosi had come into Jafari's life a few years ago, Mosi's days had been divided between Kenya, where the boy lived with his mother, and Sudan, where he himself now made his home. Mosi was a bundle of joy, a light that filled every space he entered. Often Jafari marveled that something so pure had sprung from him, from his own blood. When Mosi was in Kenya, Jafari missed him like air. When he was here, Jafari longed for him never to leave. The boy fit with everyone, especially the Dark King, who seemed to grow softer in his presence. After a time, Mosi lifted the wooden lion again. "He is fierce," the boy declared, placing it between them. "But you are fiercer. My papa is strongest of all." Jafari kissed the crown of his son's head. "Then I must remember it," he whispered, more to himself than to the child. He closed his eyes and let the small weight anchor him. The boy's laughter, a thin line of light drawn through the shadow that would not lift. Morning came soft and pale, laying a thin band of light across the floor of Malik's chamber. The brazier had burned down to ash. The bowl of broth on the low table had cooled to a skin. Sankitara kept his vigil as he had through so many nights, a damp cloth folded in his palm, his eyes fixed upon the flutter of breath at Malik's lips. A tremor moved across Malik's face, small at first, like the stir of a leaf before wind. His lashes lifted, the clouded gaze that had wandered in fever drew into focus, and for a heartbeat, the room seemed to hold itself still. "Water?" Sankitara whispered, as if speaking too loud might frighten the moment away. He slipped an arm beneath Malik's shoulders and raised him gently. Malik's body was light as a bird's, all bone and shadow. He tilted the cup, and Malik drank by sips, each swallow a small conquest. When he could speak, his voice came thin and urgent, as though the words had waited too long behind a gate. "On that dreadful day years ago, I was pulled from the fire," he said. "A stranger's hands, smoke in my lungs, the world turning black." He paused, breath hitching. "I woke in a house I did not know, stone without windows, a door that sang when it closed. He kept me there, years, it felt like years, counting time by the ache in my bones." Sankitara's hand tightened around the cup. "Who?" he asked softly. "Who did this?" "I do not know his name," Malik said. "I had never seen him before. His face was ordinary and merciless. He told me stories instead of giving me day or sun. Cruel stories from outside, of you, of the kingdom, of the fire you set when you believed me dead." There were tears in Malik's eyes. "I wept when I heard it. I thought I had broken you, even from so far away." Sankitara bowed his head, as if the words themselves were a brand. "I begged for freedom," Malik whispered. "I tried to loosen hinges with spoons, to wear down stone with my hands, to blind him with dust. But his walls were true, his hands were strong. I had nothing but breath and your name." He faltered, fingers twisting in the coverlet. "One night, he came to me laughing. He said the Dark King had found new love. He said your heart had mended around another." Malik's mouth trembled, and the tears that had threatened slipped free. "In that moment, I thought I would die of it. But the thought of losing you forever set fire to my limbs. I began to plan by the beat of my blood. I learned the weight of his steps, the hour he slept deepest, the way the latch lifted if you wedged a sliver of wood, just so. When the chance came, I ran with all that was left in me. I did not look behind." The room grew very quiet. Outside, a single bird cried and was gone. Malik turned his face to Sankitara, and all his bravado fell away. He reached, seeking the king's hand with thin fingers that shook. "Tell me," he breathed. "Tell me, Sankitara, do you still love me?" The question hung between them like a blade edge. Sankitara's breath staggered. His gaze searched Malik's face, the old beloved lines now carved by fear, and in his eyes, wonder and terror warred. Malik's composure broke. He pressed the king's hand to his cheek and wept openly. "I still love you," he said, the words spilling as if they had waited years in his throat. "Every day in that prison, I made a cup of your name and drank from it to live. If you do not love me still, I will break." I have no other harbor. Sankitara's chest heaved once, twice. Something ancient and aching rose through him and would not be denied. He set the cup aside with a clatter that sounded too loud in the small room and gathered Malik into his arms as one gathers a child from the edge of a precipice. "Of course I love you," the Dark King whispered fiercely into Malik's hair. "I will never stop loving you." Malik shuddered against him, a breath that was half sob, half relief. The king's hand moved in slow circles at his back. The cooled broth sat forgotten, the brazier gave no heat. For a long while they held to each other, as if the room itself were a small boat on a wide, uncertain sea, and love, old, painful, undeniable, were the only rope between them. They did not see the shadow at the threshold. Jafari stood in the half-light of the doorway, one hand on the lintel to steady himself. He had come with no plan but a simple, aching wish to be near the man he loved. The wish broke against the words he heard. He heard it all. He heard the story of the prison and the cruel laughter of a nameless captor. He heard Malik's plea, thin as thread. He heard Sankitara's voice answer, fierce and certain, "Of course I love you. I will never stop loving you." Something inside Jafari gave way, quiet as silk, tearing. Tears rose without sound, slipping warm and salt along his cheeks. His breath hitched and would not settle, as though the air itself had turned to thorns. For a heartbeat, he tried to stand very still, like a man who has been struck and waits to see if his legs remember their work. They did not. He turned blindly and fled. The corridor opened before him like a long river. He ran its length with the heedless speed of one escaping fire. Tapestries blurred, hunts and storms, kings and gods, until they were only color at the edge of his vision. A servant stepped back against the wall, startled, clutching a basket to her chest. Somewhere a door clicked. Somewhere a cup rang faintly against stone. The sounds reached him as from underwater. At a turn in the passage, his hand caught the edge of a pillar, and he spun, breath ragged, the world unsteady beneath his feet. The wooden lion Mosi had given him pressed hard against his palm, where he had forgotten he held it. He stared at it, dazed, at the carved mane, at the tiny teeth, and felt, for an instant, the small weight of his son's trust. It was too much. He closed his fingers around it until the edges bit his skin, and then he ran again. All this while, he had told himself that Sankitara tended Malik only out of duty, only because it was the right thing to do. But to hear him confess love to Malik, to hear those words spoken aloud, was a wound so deep Jafari feared it might kill him. Past the colonnade, where garlands for a wedding had wilted in bowls of water. Past a window where the day shone too bright for sorrow. Past the alcove where the soup had cooled and certainty with it. He could not breathe, could not think, only move, only put distance between himself and the words that had unmade him. He reached the outer court and the air struck him, sun and dust, the cry of a bird arrowing into the open sky. He stood there a moment with his hand over his mouth, as if to keep his heart from spilling out in pieces. In the far corner of the great courtyard, the world was in motion. Carriages stood ready beneath flapping standards. Trunks were lashed, steps drawn up and down. Horses tossed their manes and stamped at the dust. King Adebayo stood beside his coach with Kwame, Danso, Wamba, Arewa, and the Queen Mother gathered near, faces set for travel, farewells already on their tongues. Their 2-week stay had ended, duty called them home. Unlike the other guests, they had lingered longer, choosing to remain in Sudan to comfort Jafari. Jafari reached them with a small bag clutched in one hand. His face was pale, as if all color had drained to the earth at his feet. "My friend," Adebayo said, startled, half turning from the step of the carriage. "What has happened?" Jafari tried to speak and could not. His throat worked once, twice, before the words came out thin and shaking. He does not love me anymore. I cannot stay here and watch. Please, take me with you. Take me to Nigeria. I cannot bear this heartbreak. King Adebayo studied Jafari for a long breath and another. He did not argue, did not soothe with empty comfort. He simply extended his hand as one offers a rope to a drowning man. "Come," he said, "tell me everything on the road." Kwame moved without a word, making room within. Arewa lowered her eyes in quiet sorrow. The Queen Mother pressed a palm to her heart, blessing him under her breath. Jafari set his small bag upon the carriage floor and climbed in, his limbs heavy as if wading into deep water. Outside, the driver called to the team. Leather creaked, wheels began to turn. The courtyard stones received the first roll of departure like a drum. Jafari gripped the window frame with both hands as the coach lurched forward. He did not look back at first. Then, drawn by a thread he could not cut, he turned. Across the bright court, a small figure broke free of a guard's gentle grasp and ran, sandals slapping stone. "Papa!" Mosi cried, voice high and urgent, curls flying as he chased the moving wheel. "Papa, wait!" Jafari's heart crumbled. He leaned far out the window, his voice breaking as it cut across the stones. "Mosi, go back to your mother." Arogo had stepped forward from the gathered courtiers, her arms already reaching. The boy faltered, torn, before stumbling toward her embrace. The coach rolled on, slow but inexorable, carrying Jafari away as dust rose in soft clouds behind the wheels. He pressed his forehead against the wooden frame, torn between the ache of leaving and the unbearable weight of staying. His son's cry still echoed in his ears as King Adebayo's hand settled on his shoulder, steady but silent. And as the palace walls fell further into the distance, the air seemed to hold its breath, balanced on the edge of a fate not yet revealed.